Let's begin with the dangerous and move on to the occupations that promised a grave at an early age. Number 15. Hat makers. As you may have guessed, this profession inspired the phrase, mad as a hatter. In the 18th and 19th centuries, hatters suffered from mercury poisoning, which caused them to lose their memories, shake uncontrollably, and suffer from mental disorders. The metal mercury was used to soften the fibers of the felt, and they inhaled the fumes on a daily basis over a period of years. The tremors could be seen, and in the later stages of the poisoning, the workers' personalities changed. They also often experienced delusions and hallucination, symptoms of psychosis. Luckily, the hats were stylish. Otherwise, thousands of hatters would have lost their lives due to mercury poisoning. But it's better to die at a young age than to live a long life with shaking hands and poor memory. There was no reason for people to suspect that the cause of all these problems was mercury poisoning, since the theory of germs did not exist back then. Many workers believed that these were the signs of aging. This theory prevailed for several decades until it was concluded that mercury was responsible for their illnesses. Several communities of hat makers were left with trembling bodies and shaking hands, and the terrible memories of losing their mental health. But fortunately for the hatters, their madness did not last for long. Number 14. Chimney sweeps. Chimney sweeps essay. If you thought that it was bad that in the 18th century it was illegal to leave the house after your 21st birthday, it's nothing in comparison to how awful the job of chimney sweeps was. They had to be small even to get in the flues, so many starting as young as 4 or 5 years old. These little sweeps didn't have any safety equipment, which shouldn't surprise anyone, because during the 18th and 19th centuries, it was normal for boys to be climbing up hot, smoky chimney walls. Chimney sweeps could face injuries such as burns, suffocation, and becoming permanently stuck inside the chimney. Not to mention a condition that was known as chimney sweeps carcinoma, which is basically a type of cancer that could appear due to the exposure to coal and soot. It was one of the first acknowledged occupational cancers, and in that time, it really wasn't very surprising that people started to pass chimney cleaning laws to prohibit child labor. Though in this case, prohibiting took nearly a century, as it took a lot of dead and disfigured children for authorities to realize that it was wrong. Number 13. Radium girls. Back in the early 1900s, factories brought in young women to paint watch dials with radium paint because everyone thought radium was some kind of miracle, never mind that it's actually radioactive and can cause cancer. Managers told the workers to get a perfect tip on their brushes by licking the bristles. So every day, these women were swallowing tiny amounts of radioactive material over and over again. It didn't take long for terrible symptoms to show up. Some women's jaws just started to rot and fall apart, a condition they called radium jaw. Others developed severe anemia, or their bones would break for no real reason because the radium was destroying their skeletons from within. A group of these women became known as the Radium Girls. Their long struggle led to one of the first big wins for labor rights in America. Companies finally had to admit that workplace poisoning was real and could be prevented. It was a huge moment, but for many of those women, change came too late. Number 12. Coal miners. Coal mining has always been rough, and it's taken more lives than just about any other job out there. You didn't just go to work, you went underground for hours at a time. People breathed in coal dust day after day, until their lungs basically turned to stone. That's how you got black lung disease. And honestly, that was if something quicker didn't get you first. Cave-ins happened all the time. Support beams were cheap, inspections were rare, and things just gave way. Methane gas would build up, and all it took was a single spark. A whole section of the mine could blow in seconds. Flooding was another nightmare. Water would rush in out of nowhere, blocking every exit, leaving workers trapped deep underground, sometimes with nobody coming to help. Back in the 1800s and early 1900s, mining disasters didn't just kill a handful, they could wipe out hundreds of people at once. The rescue plans were usually slow, poorly funded, and sometimes the company would just call it off. If those at the top figured it was too expensive or difficult, they'd walk away and leave people behind. It happened a lot more than anyone wants to admit. Number 11. Leech collectors. Before the discovery of modern medicine, Leeches were seen as an integral part of any medical staff. They were used in bloodletting treatment to cure almost all kinds of diseases known at that time. However, someone had to collect them first, and poor people who did this work for payment became victims of not only hard work, but also of leeches' bites. The task of leech collectors was to go into the swamps, attract them with their legs, and pull them out. They worked several times a day, receiving about 5 francs for their half-hour effort. Sometimes they managed to collect up to 20 leeches at once. People who collected leeches by hand had anemia, infections, and died from blood loss due to a high number of leeches feeding at the same time. Additionally, the swamp water was contaminated, and living in it was dangerous for the collector's health. Such was the price of the so-called scientific progress and bloodless medical procedures. Number 10. Powder monkeys. During the era of wooden ships, gunpowder had to be brought from the ship's magazine to the cannons during a fight. This was a dangerous job, which was usually carried out by young boys. They were called powder monkeys because their small size allowed them to reach into small places in the lower decks of a ship. During combat, powder monkeys had to run through the ship's lower decks filled with smoke from fired cannons carrying burning gunpowder. If a spark from the cannon appeared near the powder, there would be nothing left to identify the monkey. Even if the powder monkey escaped the cannon's fire, he still had to avoid cannonballs, fragments of wood and stone from the ship, which injured more than killed during the naval battles, and drowning, which was very common during the naval battles. All that for the job that was usually given to the child that was too young to do anything else. Number 9. Tanners. Working as a leather tanner back in the day wasn't just dirty, it was downright dangerous. Before modern factories, tanners broke down animal hides using a mess of chemicals like urine, feces, and lime. Sometimes they'd mix it all by hand. Sometimes they'd just stomp around in it barefoot. Gross, right? All that exposure brought on nasty skin problems, messed up their breathing with ammonia fumes, and wrecked their lungs and eyes over time. The smell from tanneries was legendary. So awful that towns put them way out on the edges because nobody wanted that stench anywhere near their home. Folks who spent years working there often ended up with chronic health issues. Their life expectancy was way lower than other jobs. Still, someone had to make the leather for shoes, whether anyone liked it or not. Number 8. Structural iron workers. Back in the early 1900s, when cities started shooting up with skyscrapers, someone had to put those steel skeletons together way up in the sky. And honestly, safety wasn't really part of the equation. Iron workers balanced on skinny beams, often with no harness, no safety net, and nothing to grab if they lost their footing. Just empty air waiting below. They hauled heavy tools as they went, knowing that one wrong step meant a drop that almost nobody survived. These men worked on some of America's most legendary buildings, and the price was high. People died or got seriously hurt all the time. Some of these crews became legends for how boldly they did a job most of us can't even imagine. It really took a wild sort of courage, or maybe a complete lack of fear, for their own lives. Back then, building codes barely mentioned safety, since what builders actually cared about was getting things done fast and cheap. And that lunch photo, the one with workers perched on a beam, chomping their sandwiches over open air, that was just an ordinary day. That was just another day at work. Number 7. Whalers. One of the most dangerous occupations of the 18th and 19th centuries was hunting whales. One had to be very skillful and courageous to face it. There was not a lot of technology to assist sailors in the past, so they had to rely solely on their own efforts and weapons to conquer the giants of the oceans. What could go wrong during such a voyage? Well, first, the harpoon had to hit the mark, or else the ship would be dragged along on a so-called Nantucket sleigh ride. Then, there was always the danger of foundering, or even being eaten by the whale if the boat was capsized. Moreover, there was a great risk of getting hurt or not returning from the voyage at all. There were numerous reasons for whalers to perish on their way back. For instance, scurvy, storms, shipwrecks, and contagious diseases in foreign lands could be a reason for that. Additionally, ships carrying whale oil rarely returned empty-handed, but left with injured crew members, as the job itself was extremely challenging and resembled hand-to-hand combat with the world's largest animals. Number 6. Asbestos miners and factory workers. The victims of corporations' carelessness essay During the 20th century, asbestos was regarded as a wonderful construction material. It was virtually indestructible and highly resistant to fire. When asbestos was processed into various products such as insulation, floor tiles, or fireproof materials, the workers never suspected that they would pay for asbestos' wonderful quality with their health. The dust of this mineral, when inhaled, leads to lung disease or even cancer. The fibers of asbestos are not broken down by the lungs, so they accumulate in them, causing lung tissue damage. This deadly disease, called mesothelioma, is a rare form of cancer that is diagnosed in people whose occupational activities involve working with asbestos. Asbestos companies were well aware of the potential harm to employees' health before any regulations were enforced. It was confirmed by the documents, which indicated that already in the 1930s, asbestos producers acknowledged the potential danger of asbestos. However, such information did not motivate them to take any measures to ensure workers' safety, as it could affect their profits. Unfortunately, thousands of workers have died from lung cancer caused by inhalation of asbestos dust. Number 5. Executioners. Someone has to perform them, and history shows that a person who performed them was either an integral part of the society or an outcast. People who performed executions were the ones who carried out the most dreadful punishment. They also seem to have a rather special place in the past society. It is hard to say whether it was better to be respected by the authorities and perform the most loathsome job in the kingdom, or never even think about this job because it was too awful. Executioners were always on the margins of the society, because no one wanted to interact with them. Even if they were respected for people's fear, the fear was enough to keep any sane person away from them. Moreover, the job of beheading, hanging, slicing, or shooting was not as simple as one might think. There were always mistakes, beheadings that turned out to be unsuccessful and required multiple hits, hanging with wrong length of a rope leading to slow suffocation instead of a quick death, and a bunch of other dreadful mistakes. All such cases led to the murder of an executioner by a furious crowd. In addition, it was not the only reason why people feared executioners. The job required years and decades of training. It seems that in the past, the job of killing was not a killing job anymore, but a decent occupation, one that almost guaranteed you a stable future. It was so stable because no one wanted to take it. It seems that in the past, no one wanted to be an executioner, and no one wanted to become an executioner unless he had to. As a consequence, it is possible that all executioners were forced by circumstances to become killers, not born into it. Number 4. Bridge and tunnel workers. Building the infrastructure for the modern world came at an incredible price. Those who worked underground on the tunnels, particularly those tunnels built through water, suffered from an excruciating condition called caisson disease, commonly known as decompression sickness or the bends. This malady proved deadly to many. The workers, who labored inside huge cylinders at the end of the tunnels, were subjected to enormous water pressure. When they surfaced, nitrogen bubbles, which dissolved in their blood, tissues, and muscles while they were under pressure, expanded painfully, often leaving the unfortunate worker paralyzed or dead. Hundreds died as a result of the bends during the construction of such projects as the Great Belt Bridge and tunnels in 19th century America. Even considering all of the deaths that resulted from cave-ins, drowning, and structural failures, the number of workers who died from decompression sickness during these projects was astounding. Safety did not come a priority in the early 20th century. Progress was measured in projects finished, not in projects finished without injury or loss of life. As a result, hundreds of workers died during the early 20th century infrastructure building frenzy, and many more were injured. Some bridges even gained morbid notoriety for the number of workers who died during their construction. Advancement truly was purchased with lives. Number 3. Plague doctors. When the plague came to Europe, there had to be people who could treat the disease, which led to the formation of the plague doctors, experts who wear special beaked masks in order to protect themselves from the infection. The mask was not an aesthetic choice because it was filled with herbs and flowers, which were believed to cure the disease, based on an incorrect theory of airborne transmission. Plague doctors treated bubonic plague patients with methods that did little against the bacteria causing the disease, such as opening the boils, bleeding, and applying various substances to the affected parts of the body. Plague doctors had one of the highest occupational death risks because of their proximity to the disease, and many towns faced a shortage of them, as the few available doctors died because of the dangerous working conditions. Those few doctors that survived were shunned by the other townspeople because of the horrifying experience and the possibility of being contagious. Number 2, matchstick factory workers. During the 19th century, matches were made from white phosphorus, a deadly toxic substance. Female workers, who typically handled this substance, were forced to work long hours of exposure to this poison with little to no protection. This caused them to suffer from the condition called phossy jaw, a slow poisoning of the jawbone from phosphorus, leading to its decay, suppuration, and even glowing in the dark. Yes, glowing in the dark. Just imagine how much phosphorus is in someone's body for their bones to glow. This condition often resulted in deforming, brain lesions, organ failure, and death. Moreover, the workers who suffered from the mentioned symptoms were simply fired without any attempt to provide them with an opportunity to receive adequate treatment, because there was a constant supply of desperate workers willing to work in such conditions. It took years of protests and strikes for manufacturers to finally replace white phosphorus with a safer alternative. However, it was not the workers' well-being that influenced their decision. Instead, it was the public awareness and pressure on the companies to stop exposing workers to dangerous substances that led to the change. Number 1, Roman gladiators. Let's talk about Roman gladiators, the ones who never chose that life. A lot of people picture skilled warriors chasing glory, but the ugly truth is, most of them were slaves, criminals, or prisoners of war. They had no say. They got thrown into the arena, whether they wanted to or not. Some became famous, sure, and a handful even earned their freedom. But for a lot of them, the fights were deadly right from the start. Crowds wanted action, so rookies got tossed in just to bleed for entertainment. And it wasn't always a fair fight. Sometimes they'd face wild animals, lions, bears, even elephants. You can guess how that usually turned out. Even if someone survived a few matches, their odds didn't really get much better. The whole system depended on bodies piling up, and Rome expected to see blood every time. If you didn't make it big, you just ended up as another forgotten casualty, lost in the records, a single entry in Rome's long, grim list of the dead.